it's great to get this community together from Canada and the Forest Service, as well as, say myself representing the aerospace industry, and try to figure out what we can do now to confront the growing problem we have with wildfires.
Yeah, thanks, Dee. There's a lot of great work that aerospace has been doing, and for so long too, for the last 20 years. So yeah, I know, Everett, I wanted to jump to you now. I know the U.S. Forest Service also uses satellite data. Dee had mentioned the FireGuard effort. So tell us, what kind of data do you guys use and how do you use it?
Dee was correct that FireGuard was one of the programs that came out of that, and that's an active fire monitoring program. We also use satellites like GOES, MODIS, the Aqua and Terra sensors, and VIIRS for strategic monitoring of U.S. forest fires from space. Terra and Aqua are in extended operations at the moment. They're well past their intended lifespan, and so NASA has decided that those satellites are going to be decommissioned over the next 2 years. Next year and a half, actually, and they'll begin to have degrading orbits and so forth. So that's a little bit of a concern from us for the strategic monitoring. And one of the things I should mention is the difference between strategic and tactical. Tactical is where the folks on the ground can use that information to decide where to position their resources, where to get people out of the way. Whereas the strategic monitoring is less precise in terms of the location of the fires and perimeters and things like that. So, but we do use these NASA assets for the strategic monitoring. We also use Landsat and Sentinel for limited tactical monitoring when the timing of the overpasses is optimum over a particular fire, and we also use those for post-fire mapping after the incident has been. After the fire has been contained, so that we can start to do the rehabilitation and remediation efforts after the fire is put out. And in terms of looking ahead, there's a lot of commercial systems they're likely to be launched over the next few years, whether they're microsats or larger satellites like the Canadian system. And we will continue to evaluate those systems and capabilities as they come online, work with the whoever the entity is that's launching those systems, and make sure that they understand what our requirements and needs are. And let's see, try to think. So yeah, as I mentioned, there's a number of commercial systems like Maxar and Planet that may come into use operationally for the Forest Service.
When we were watching the progress of the Dixie Fire, we were going to various websites and checking out whatever the latest data was, including data that was provided by the National Forest Service, and basically tracking what was happening and, hoping that things were going to turn out right. Getting the right data is so critical. I want to follow up with you on that just a bit. What are the gaps in the data that we get from space now? And what data do you wish you had?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. And I actually feel like we have a pretty solid set of remote sensing tools, whether it's unmanned aircraft, manned aircraft. We're starting to look at lighter than air systems that can station keep over a fire for a long period of time with remote sensing sensors. And we're going to continue to look at the spaceborne systems. But I think you hit the nail on the head there, that with fires, time is of the essence, especially when you're at a very dynamic incident like like the Dixie Fire, the Camp Fire a couple of years that burned through Paradise. Minutes count, and you can't afford to have any latency in the provided products that you're delivering. So one of the things that I've been concentrating over in the last couple of years is the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to help with the processing of this ever-widening fire hose of data that we're exposed to, so that we can pull out those bits of information that we need, produce the products, and deliver them to the incidents. Getting the right information to the right people at the right time and in the right format is key. And So trying to reduce any latency between when you collect the imagery over a fire and when you deliver a tactical product to the incident. We're trying to shorten that time frame as much as possible. The whole process is collection of data, processing of data, analysis of data, production of products, and then delivery to the incident. And I refer to that as a pipeline. So anything that we can do to shorten that pipeline to getting that information to those folks is key to the work that we're doing.
Josh or Dee, do you guys have anything to add on that timeliness issue? What do they do in Canada to make sure that the data gets to the fire managers quickly?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on that, and it is, I think Everett sums it up quite well in many ways, but the trick is, it's not just about getting the data to the people in the right time in the right format. It's getting them the actual information that they want, right? So really deeply understanding how they're making their decisions, where their gaps in understanding are, and preemptively working with them to develop that sort of knowledge base and understanding, so that nobody's trying to learn something new in a state of emergency. Like, that is by far the worst time to learn something new, right? And so, in terms of how we're going about it at the moment and things like Wildfires, that on the downstream, like where we're building the products, nearly half of the funding that we're expending there is actually going towards knowledge exchange and preparing our end users for uptake. They're full partners in actually designing the products as well. The science is science, right? Like there's a limited amount that we can maneuver in terms of the physical reality of things, but the way we present it and the way we distribute it can be augmented in a lot of different ways to make sure that it's easier for non-experts to understand it. Everett, I from all the time I've spent with you and the TIFRSAC group, I always quote Sean Triplett in saying, we want to give them information, not imagery. And that's really what it is how can we create imagery, or how can we create information in such an easily digestible way that even under duress, non-experts can look at it at a glance and go, okay, I get what's going on. And everything else falls into the background. But when we think about data latency, there's another aspect of it too, which is end user latency and actually comprehension and decision, right? So how long do they have to spend thinking about what they're seeing? We can minimize that as well.
If I could jump in here, those are really good points, Josh. And one of the things that we've worked really hard with the TIFRSAC, which is the Tactical Fire Remote Sensing Advisory Committee, which has been in place for 19 years now, is to really understand what the end user requirements are. What does that information need to look like? What format does it need to be in? What's the positional accuracy that's acceptable, spectral requirements, and so forth. But really have those in a requirements matrix that we can pass off to people that are developing capabilities, so that they really fully understand, for different phases of fire, different types of fire, what is the information that's needed by the responding unit. So that's really helped a lot, having that document that we can share with folks, and really working with the end user community to understand what information they need. And if you go to a fire, there's different people that are working there that require different bits of information. So it's not a sort of a one size fits all in terms of the information that you're delivering, but to understand that there's a lot of nuance there.
Right.
Well, thanks for both of those comments. Dee, maybe I can turn to you and follow up with a little bit more additional information. Can we use remote sensing capabilities to predict wildfires? I've heard several people talk about post-fire recovery, which would seem to be another place where remote sensing capabilities can help. And what do you think might be the highest priorities in terms of remote sensing support? What are the things that we should focus most on? Over.
Yeah, that's a broad question, but there certainly is a pre-fire phase where remote sensing can play a role on fuel characterization and fuel moisture content There's new work as well as some past work with hyperspectral sensors looking at that, and wide area coverage by airborne assets to survey our national forests and other areas that are under threat can help in the pre-fire phase. Certainly, fire weather forecasting is something that's pretty highly advanced by our NOAA colleagues, and that's a pre-fire exercise that's extremely important, and important for both prescribed fire as well as assessing wildfire risk. Post-fire, I think Everett mentioned, we use imagery resources to map out and hopefully automatedly map out burned regions. Everything from SAR to reasonably high resolution imagery is used for that, as well as airborne. Some other areas where I think there's more work we could do, both on latency and utility, is thinking about maybe things we haven't been doing as much of that we could do, such as nighttime fire detection. At night, your sensors can be used in more sensitive settings than they are during the day. And even sensors that we use now, such as Landsat, conceivably could be used more often at night. Chris Elvidge and I did research using Landsat at night, and my guess is the Forest Service has probably done work with Landsat at night. But what about the European Sentinel satellite? And what about these new commercial imagery satellites, such as those flown by organizations or companies such as Black Sky and Maxar? Could we interest people in changing the settings on their satellites so we could do more work at night for monitoring and even detecting, in some cases, fires? Those are some of the ideas that I've been kicking around myself in the course of my research, and really listening to some of the forums that Everett's been pulling together.
It's a really good point, Dee. Sorry, I'm just going to dive in here, Dave. But, overnight, the probability of a false positive is way, way lower, right? You don't have reflections off of water bodies and all kinds of other things. So, yeah, Dee is absolutely right. You can do some, yeah, sure, the fires are less intense overnight, but they don't need to be. We can find them with very weak signals, even in the dark. Sure.
And one of the things I learned from listening to the fire professionals is that, people in towers and with cell phones looking at smoke during the day are pretty quick at spotting fires. At night, especially when the moon's down, as was the case for the fire that burnt out Paradise, California, you can get zero warning. And so trying to augment that could have a important impact.
And just to add to the context there, yes, there are those extreme cases like what we see in California where, a fire can start overnight and already take out a town. But in the run-of-the-mill case, and a lot of locations, overnight is the time when the fires aren't moving too fast, or they shouldn't be. And if that's the situation, when you find them at the middle of the night and you report it to the folks first thing in the morning, there's a good chance it's still where you saw it, right? And you can imagine that if you can make a lot of headway in suppression early in the morning before you hit peak burn, that gives you an awful lot of time. If you woke up in the morning, you showed up and somebody just gave you a report and said, here's all the fires in your district. Well, you can deploy resources. You can hit them small before they're a problem. By the time the folks in the tower are seeing them, they're already putting up smoke and they're already cooking. And it's not the best time to be trying to suppress, right?
You guys talked about the importance of using remote sensing for some of the pre-fire work and the importance of weather forecasting. I seem to recall before the town of Lytton was destroyed, didn't they have like a record high temperature in that town, like almost 120 degrees Fahrenheit? Something phenomenal. I know you use centigrade in Canada, but that temperature just struck me. And were people mobilized because of that, or just kind of went, wow, it was hot? Or did it actually mobilize fire managers?
Well, let's just say everyone was on high alert. I mean, the fact that Lytton burned was an unbelievable tragedy, but at the same time, we knew that something was going to happen, right? The whole province kind of went off simultaneously at that point, and that massive heat wave in the build up to it was a very clear indicator. Like that, and this is kind of the challenge, right? Is we knew that the conditions were right for extreme fire activity. The real uncertainty is about occurrence. Where is that ignition going to happen and when? And there's ways you can mitigate that, of course. But at the end of the day, we always are stuck chasing them when they first start. I mean, even if you knew full well that there was a high probability that the fire would start in one specific location, probability is probability. And until it's a certainty, you're not going to just preemptively deploy resources, right? Because it could happen somewhere else. And if you had everybody standing at the ready in Lytton, well, what happens if the town down the road is the one who got hit? So, yeah, without getting too deep into one specific event, Lytton got taken out, but the entire interior of BC was lit up simultaneously.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that comes to mind on the DoD systems is if you're going to use them and you have limited resources, you can set yourself up to be effective by targeting these red flag conditions that are extremely high risk. In other words, if you have a limited team to support, stand them up when conditions are the most serious to get that extra level of support that you might be able to get from some of the Defense Department systems. And then you're adding a layer of capability that you might not be able to sustain for the entire year. So that's another lesson that we learned from when these systems work best.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. Go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, if I could add to that, one of the things that they've been doing a lot of study on in the pre-fire phase of fire is doing the fuel mapping. Fuel mapping is a pretty difficult and time and labor intensive process. And so we're looking for ways to leverage remote sensing capabilities to better map the fuels. The other thing that they're looking at now is there's a lot of focus on things like controlled burning. And, that can be a dicey proposition, doing controlled burns, but it's something that absolutely needs to be done. And so figuring out those areas of the country where you have the highest buildup of fuels, and once again, using remote sensing capabilities, and then using that as a map to figure out where to go and do the controlled burns. And there's a lot of improved analytics and predictive behavior models that are looking to inform things like suppression difficulty indices and potential control locations in advance of fires that will help to improve the suppression performance when fires break out. So they're doing these mappings to say, okay, how easy is it to get our response resources to a particular area that we know is very likely going to burn? And so that's where the suppression difficulty indices and potential control locations come in. And a lot of this is based on remote sensing analysis.
Oh, there's a lot of pre-work that's done, I guess year round. It doesn't seem like the fire season has any beginning or end anymore. I mean, there was that huge tragedy in Colorado in January.
Right.
Took out part of another community. But let me ask this question. We're talking about the efforts that are occurring in the United States and in Canada. How should we go about partnering across government borders? And Josh, maybe I can ask you this question. It's not just the governments trying to organize with each other, but also within a particular government, getting the agencies to talk to each other. How do we get that job done? And maybe how can U.S. and Canadian systems complement each other?
Wow, that we could have a whole separate episode on that one, Dave. But the truth is, the systems have to complement each other, right? And in particular, here's a great example. Wildfires sat about 60% of the products, the value-added products of WildfireSat, are actually dependent on VIIRS. So the entire system is designed to form a virtual constellation with VIIRS and amplify its value. And so, I think when you look going forward globally, anything that we're doing in this domain, it is a system of systems, and it will be a patchwork of different contributions from different countries. I think at the working level, there's a tremendous sort of mobility, and it's not a problem at all for us to create some sort of ad hoc arrangements where we can share data between each other. But that's not what we want here, because what we really want are operational systems that we can rely on, we can count on, and we know that they're not going to go down at random. And, we can guarantee that they are going to be there when you need them. So it is something that we're looking at presently, because in our current sort of model for WildfireSat, we're only capable of delivering near real-time data over Canada. But the system itself is capable of doing it anywhere in the world, provided that there's ground station availability in those regions. And, a fine example being the US has the capability to downlink the data, and we do need to broker proper agreements so that we can modify the ConOps for the mission to be talking to those ground stations as it passes over. And to be honest with you, it's something that we're trying to address right now. We understand how we can centralize that decision making in Canada by, we have memorandum of understanding between all the departments who are contributors. But when we approach a country like the US, I was joking around with Everett the other day. There's 14 separate agencies who want a bilateral agreement on WildfireSat data, which is an awful lot of bilateral agreements between two countries. So, we're trying to figure out what is the right way to pull everything together. And I think in some ways, brokering that agreement or figuring out who it is that you would have that agreement with is an awful lot like how you would plan the mission itself. Who are the users? Who are the people who actually require it and are the ones who actually need to pull it in for the primary use case? And I think in my simple-minded understanding, those are the drivers. And then all of the other departments who support them in getting to that state are the parties that are all kind of contributing to it. But certainly who signs the agreement, it's somebody far above me is going to be the one to decide who's the signatory. But once it's in place, then everything else falls like dominoes.
If I could add to that, that's a very good look at the work that's being done in Canada and what needs to be done in order for the United States to work with Josh and the Canadian government so that we can benefit from this Wildfires satellite that they're launching, or this series of satellites that they're launching. To kind of step back from that a little bit, I'm a firm believer in communities of practice, and the Tactical Fire Remote Sensing Advisory Committee, which was mentioned earlier, is it's a community of practice for remote sensing applications and applying that to wildland fire. And we have members who attend from state and local governments, federal governments, federal agencies in the U.S. government. We have international partners like Josh. We have participants from Australia and other countries that are also suffering from wildland fire. And we're working together to try to figure out solutions that we can use universally. And so I think having a community of practice that's established to bring people together, including people that are first responders in the fire community, so that we fully understand what their information needs are, that goes a long way toward developing that connective tissue that we need to, so that we're building systems that are complementary, and that the fire community feels like that they've been a part of as those solutions are being developed.
Everett, do you think there are technical barriers that still exist that need to be addressed?
Some of the technical difficulties, Dee mentioned early on that there's been some work with the folks in the Defense Department and IC communities and leveraging some of those capabilities that they have. And for me, that's probably one of the biggest levels of difficulty in trying to leverage existing capabilities and produce a product that's unclassified that you can share with the community. That's always a big hurdle to get through. And then, as Josh mentioned, also developing the appropriate either memorandum of understanding or bilateral agreements to help facilitate that engagement between government agencies and across borders. So that's really the tough part. The technical piece, we have a lot of really bright people that are in sensor development, in satellite development, whether it's full-size systems, microsats, or anything in between. We have a lot of really bright people that are capable of building these sensors to whatever specifications we want to throw at them. And then it's a question of us of balancing the capabilities versus the cost.
That is the big one, Everett? Anything's possible with the right amount of money. And,
right.
And that's, been the bane of my existence with trade-off analysis on that, on a fixed budget.
So glad to hear that you guys have started on the way, though. Sounded like I interrupted somebody. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, in the U.S., we're sort of at a fortunate, I don't know if it's really fortunate is the right word, but because there's been a lot of very large incidents and the trends are all moving in the wrong direction, there's a lot of political attention, and political attention often translates into funding to help support these capabilities. So one of the things that I've been asking people to do in the remote sensing in the fire community is figure out and identify what our specific needs are, so that if funding starts to bubble up, that we know exactly where we would like to tell the folks in Congress and at the White House where we would like to direct those funds to provide the best benefit in the short term.
Mm.
But this is really a time of opportunity in terms of helping to forward and advance some of these systems that we know will provide benefits to in the fire suppression efforts.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the cost of fighting a single mega fire, it's, the disaster related costs of these things can hit $1 billion. It's, in terms of insured loss and things like that. So you would think that we could leverage those types of numbers to attract federal funding towards technology that would help mitigate the wildfire threat. The real challenge is deciding, okay, we have a community of fire professionals. Do they want some of these ideas, or do they have, speaking as a space person, do they want a civil overhead persistent infrared capability, or would they want more aerial assets, or would they want area stats, or would they want the IC to streamline the data release of existing systems? Where do we put the money to get the operators what they need?
I think that, in terms of like the cost and the business case for these types of things, one of the best things that we did with Wildfiresat was we brought in our economic researchers to take a look at it and look at a value of information analysis on the mission. And, never mind the suppression costs or the insurable losses when a community is hit. They looked at it at the most conservative possible way and just said, well, what's the impact of smoke and air quality on our economy right now? And in Canada, the disruptions from smoke and the load on our healthcare system and it's frequently what causes evacuations here. It ranges from $5 to $20 billion a year. And this is indirect. It's spread. Yeah, and it's spread across all sectors, right? And you see occasional events where like one fire will smoke out an oil camp, and by shutting that down for 3 weeks, we drop the GDP of the country, and there's, so if you were to look at just the impact of the mission and went really conservative and said, okay, well, we can, by improving our understanding and our awareness of that and cutting the cost to our economy by 2%, something like that, we can still say that in the first fire season, we were to recoup the entire cost of the mission on a conservative estimate. And that doesn't even touch what it's helping our fire managers do, which is its primary purpose. And I think like having that kind of information and bringing it to the decision makers and framing it in a way like that, where it's like, look, we have a way to help, and we know that it's going to help our economy in a major, major way. And this is the tip of the iceberg, right? And I think, to Everett's point about, there is a lot of political attention towards fire. And I'm sorry, but under climate change, nothing is going to get better from here on out, right? A lot of it is about getting ahead of it and messaging and communicating. Because if you don't, these people are so driven to help us, they're going to make up their own mind of what they want to do. And it's better to give them options that the community sees as productive. And, as a researcher, I hate to admit this, but I spent a tremendous amount of time in the last year or so learning all about every single policy that ever existed in this government and drawing all of those linkages. And that is, it can be tedious, but when you really look at the big picture of the stuff we're trying to do and how it relates to carbon emissions, how it relates to the safety and security of our communities, to our healthcare system, to everything, it's an ironclad case. And I think it's one of those situations where the more times full governments make the decision that this is a worthwhile investment, that signal is so strong that it's going to lead to a lot more. It's going to lead to opening up commercial markets in a big new way, and et cetera. I could rant on forever on this stuff, as you can imagine.